Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast. We are, as always, very excited to be with you. I got to find a new intro, Tova. I say this every time, and I don't want people to think I don't mean it. So I am super, super happy to be here. Today, we are continuing our journey into the heart. We're asking you, how is your heart? We're asking ourselves, how is our heart? And this is topic today is I am anxious about. I'm going to be upfront. I don't know why I'm anxious about it entirely, but I
Possibly
am
because
anxious.
both of our moms listen to this podcast.
Well, and my dad produces it. So we're talking about parenting, folks. Before we dive in, we're gonna say hello to Tova, who I've already talked to, but hello Tova. How are you? What's happening?
Hello, Riley. I am good. This
That was very, very convincing.
This week has been a lot.
Yeah.
And can I vent for a moment?
I mean,
not
it's our
about,
show. You can do what you want.
I mean, that's true. That's true. I was gonna say my name's on the podcast, but it's not, because it's it's called something else. But
yeah.
Not about why this week has been a lot, because that is a deeper conversation that even my therapist and I ran out of time to discuss yesterday. We actually talked, we're like, we're going to start with the easiest thing. And then we're like, wait, that took 43 minutes.
Ooh, that was easy.
Yeah. Okay. So you may or may not recall, and yes, I am stalling us from getting to the real heart of this conversation. I do want to say that let's not talk about going to the journey of the heart, because immediately I'm like Joseph Conrad in The Heart of Darkness.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
that makes
Lord
me
of the Flies, it's a whole thing.
Weirdly happy. I don't know.
Okay, so you may or may not know that I am a big fan of Hallmark movies. Specifically the holiday Hallmark movies. I do try to watch them in January and February, and eventually I run out of interest and I just can't keep it going.
Yeah.
And I particularly enjoy watching a Hallmark movie and then listening to the Deck the Hallmark podcast that are three men who both love and hate, depending on the man, the movies. And this provides me great joy every year.
Right.
And this season, there are a number of factors that may be affecting my enjoyment of the movies. One is potentially the writer's strike, right? Because a lot of these movies get made over the summer and in the fall. So a lot of the movies that I think we're seeing this year are movies that were made in the vault, that may not
have been shelved for a while.
Yeah, they may not have seen the light of day. Like 2 weekends in a row, there was like the town mechanic, is the love interest. And so I think a lot of movies, in not just the writers or the acting strike, but the writer's strike, right? So so we're already, the stale tropes. These are movies that were probably made before Hallmark really hit its stride last year, right? So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that I think I am changing as a human and growing.
Yep.
And I think it's a combo, because I do actually think that the old tropes of Hallmark are not actually on Hallmark as much as they have been in years past. And I think some of these movies are these older tropes, and either they're getting made recently and then they're deciding like, no, these are not the movies people want to see, or they were literally made years ago.
Right.
But I am just not here for the passive aggressive parents. Like the woman comes home because her apartment flooded, but she has a big work project that happens to be due on Christmas Eve, which is weird, but whatever.
Yeah.
And she tells them very clearly, I have to work. I'm here because my apartment flooded, but I need to work. And the whole time they're like, you don't value family. Why are you working so much? Why can't you come with us to Alpha Palooza? Like, Why are you, why aren't you eating lasagna with us? You never put us first. And she's like, for the love of God, this project that I'm working on, the fashion show on Christmas Eve, is going to make or break my career. And I'm just like, boundaries, people, boundaries. Like, she is being so clear. And it is just, I don't, like I said, I don't know what is changing. Is it the Hallmark movies are just poor quality this year? Or is it me? Or
Mm,
is it a combination of both?
I'm sure it's a combination because what isn't?
Yeah.
But I think this is a good segue into our topic for the day, right? Because we're talking about parenting today. We're talking
Yeah.
about family and parenting up, parenting down, all of that stuff that comes along
Yeah.
with it, which we're going to get into the nitty gritty of. But in response to what you're saying, I think like as you evolve as a human, as a parent, as a whole person, right, with like a better understanding of themselves, these kinds of things become irritating. And anyone who's listened to the show regularly knows that the universe speaks very clearly to Tova, um,
It
usually
does
through
yell.
movies, TV, or books, right? Like those are the avenues at which you get signs of like, hey, hello, what's happening, Tova? This is the news.
Yes, this is true.
And so I think like you've been watching Hallmark movies forever. I don't know, as long as I've known you. And I think probably before that.
Yeah.
And it seems like a natural vehicle to remind you of things. And what I would like to say about this is that it's something to celebrate. Like, yeah, those tropes are annoying. Like making passive aggressive parents on TV is annoying, though they exist in real life. Like it's not like they're making it up like it never happens. Of course it does. Um, but the celebration, I think, is the recognition of what kind of growth had to happen in you in order for you to have the experience of I'm watching this movie and these people are really making me angry. And why aren't they listening to her? And I think that's a huge personal growth win, right? Like that 2 years ago, you
Yeah.
probably would not have had that experience.
I think we're going to take it, and in defense briefly of Hallmark, in one of the movies I was watching last night, which was a really odd, I'm not gonna lie, odd movie.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to hear what the Deck the Hallmark guys think of it. It was definitely not their normal trope.
Okay.
I mean,
Oh
it was
my,
still
I
like,
might have to watch this one then.
well, it was still like, girls go home, but it was two
Sure.
girls. It was there's weirdness to it. Um, but one of the girls was actively trying to set boundaries with her mom,
Sure.
and she kept talking, and her friend kept saying, boundaries, remember the boundaries. And
Right.
so it was definitely one of the ones that must have been written and produced like before the writer's strike made
Yeah.
everything screech to a halt, because
Right.
it was a newer one, which I think is also interesting. And you know um we we are, one of the things we're talking about today, so let's actually dive in, I
Yeah.
think, because
Yes.
one of the big things we're talking about today is the, like you said, parenting, and but we're talking about this idea of all kinds of parenting. So sandwich parent, the sandwich generation, sandwich parenting, sort of being in the middle. So parenting up, parenting down, co-parenting. And it wasn't until fairly recently that they coined the term the sandwich generation.
Right.
Um, but that is not a new concept. There have been centuries, millennia, that someone has lived in a home with their parents and their children. It is just more recently, in the last couple of decades, that it has been acknowledged how difficult that is, and how like in society acknowledged.
Yeah. I just want to note that personally, the whole idea of living communally is much more appealing than the idea of, and I'm jumping ahead
Do
of
it.
parenting up and parenting down in multiple households because
Oh
time
yeah.
and space and, you know, the time value of money or whatever value, whatever that saying is. It's not
But
coming to
yeah.
me. Um, but like understanding that yes, this has been going on forever, but only more recently in the last 50 60 years have we all separated and lived separately. And so then it's even harder, I think.
Oh,
Not that
100%.
not that I really love you parents, but like living all in one small space would be torture for all of us. But I wouldn't mind a compound, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I was married, my ex and I used to talk about like the we could kind of see like the compound and like, okay, who's gonna live in the mother-in-law suite and who's gonna live on the tiny house and who's gonna live in like above the garage, and we'd have to get one of those chairs that would like go up the stairs, and like who would live in the different places. Like how
Right.
would we spread out all the different
Yeah,
parents?
like how do you make the space work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that so the sandwich generation is a generation of people who are caring for their aging parents while supporting their own children. And it's a big swath of people.
Yeah.
It's multiple decades of people. It can be really anywhere, people in their 30s through people in their 70s. Depending on how long your parents live and how soon your parents may need assistance and when you have kids. And, it can really be a huge group of people. Um, and and the reason I just highlight that it has happened and existed for millennia, but it's not something that we've talked about verbally. It was something
Yeah.
is, yes, I think the distance, like you mentioned, Riley, but also just because we talk about things more now.
Yeah, of
Just
course.
like it's not that passive aggressive parents or the need for boundaries or anything new. It like in Hallmark movies, it's just that now I watched a movie last night where the mom is saying, I'm going to move to where you live. They lived in, I'm moving from Iowa, but I'm going to move to Palo Alto because you live in the Bay Area and I want to live near you. And
Right.
we should move in together because it's so expensive. And the girl's like, I don't know how to tell you I don't want to do that. And you didn't want to live with your mom. And she's like,
Right.
yeah, but I'm me. And her daughter's like, yeah, but I'm the daughter. Like that's what she finally had to say. She's like, but I'm the daughter in this situation.
Right.
And so I think that things are being verbalized a lot more now. And I think as we look at future generations, fortunately there's a lot less passive aggressiveness, maybe
Yeah.
more aggressiveness, but I'd much rather have that, frankly.
Assertiveness.
Assertiveness,
Assertive.
right? And is it that's a funny meme or whatever? Like, what's the difference between being assertive and being aggressive? Your gender.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Right. So like I think this is all good. But so just to continue a couple more definitions.
Mm,
Co-parenting as an official definition. So sandwich generation, interestingly enough, is actually in the Merriam-Webster. It was
yeah.
added in 2006. Co-parenting is not in the Merriam-Webster, but I think it could be added at any moment. Um, Technically, it is the sharing of duties of raising a child, but it is always there's always a in parentheses of used, especially of parents who are separated or not in a relationship. But when we are going to be talking about it, for the most part, we are going to be talking about it without that addendum. We're just going to be talking about the idea of sharing the duties of raising a child, because I think that those duties can be shared between two partners. It can be shared between a parent and a grandparent.
Yes.
It can be shared between a parent and a nanny. It can be shared between, yes, a parent and a ex. I mean, but anytime it can be shared between a parent and an older sibling, frankly, when you're really
Or a
working
friend,
hard,
honestly.
or a
I mean,
friend.
I think the definition for us expands to anyone with whom you are in a relationship that is somehow parenting your child, right?
Right.
Like whatever that other person's label is,
And
they're also a co-parent.
yeah, and I did the research for this. And so I read a lot of advice on co-parenting, which was triggering. But I was like, oh, is that how it's supposed to work? Sorry. And I did try to pull out the things that I thought were like, okay, yeah, this is helpful no matter who you're co-parenting with,
Right.
right? And this is great information. Then the last, and this is sort of a definition, but this is something that I think we're gonna talk about throughout this conversation, is this concept of holding space.
Yeah.
Now, when we decided what we wanted to talk about in this episode, we started talking about this idea of holding space for ourselves. And then when I started doing research, the idea of holding space was always holding space for other people, holding space for your parents to age, holding space for your children's emotions. Everything I read was holding space for other people's grief. And so I'm going to share what holding space is, but I want you to think about what it means for holding space for yourself. And so even though I'm going to read this, definition sort of for other people, think about it for what it would mean to do it for yourself. So holding space refers to the act of being fully present with someone else or yourself without judgment or distraction, so that that person or you can share the experiences and perspective. It looks like creating a safe, accepting environment, engaging in attentive listening, and offering non-judgmental support. Research shows that holding space can reduce stress, anxiety, enhance relationships, and improve mental health and well-being. When I was reading about holding space, and this concept came from a blog that I have the information farther along that we may talk about, but I thought, like, this is exactly what the whole podcast is about. It's what we want people to do for themselves. We want people to hold space for themselves, to listen to themselves, to give themselves the space to not judge themselves, to be safe with themselves. So, we think it's really important as you are dealing, whether it's parenting up, and you may not be in a sandwich. Maybe you do not have children. Maybe you're just parenting and dealing with your parents, or maybe you right now are dealing with your children and you're not dealing with your parents. Whatever the case might be, a lot of the things that you need to do to ensure that you are taking care of your heart are the same.
Yeah. We do need to take a quick break. So why don't we do that? When we come back, I want to talk about get more into the sandwich generation concept and talk about what caring for means. I think it's important to get into that a little bit. So we will be right back, everyone.
Know what I really love to do?
Take baths, go for walks, read, drink margaritas, hike.
Yeah, not what I was referring to. We're recording a commercial right now.
I do, but I'm thinking outside the box, being adaptable.
As I was saying, what I love to do is host our live monthly workshops.
Oh, right. That's what we were talking about. Me too. They are a lot of fun to put together and host every month. And we can bring margaritas, so
Join us for live conversation as we get a bit deeper into topics near and dear to our hearts. We go through everything from self-care to setting boundaries.
we share coaching tips, practical advice, and take questions from the audience. It's a whole lot of fun.
Sign up for our newsletter today at goboldlyinitiative.com/contact to make sure you hear about all the upcoming Go Boldly workshops.
You definitely don't want to miss out. Now, back to that show. Okay, welcome back to the show. So before the break, we were talking about definitions and explaining sort of, as we like to do, baseline where we're coming from in this conversation. I think it's really important when we're talking about the sandwich generation concept of parenting up, parenting down. What do we mean by caring for? Because it doesn't have to be the case that your caring for looks the same as everybody else's. So sometimes it's helping your children or your parents with their mental health. Sometimes it's physical health. Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's making decisions in a world that doesn't feel the same for people, right? Like explaining technology to somebody who doesn't get it. there's any number of ways in which you might be caring for another human, and it doesn't have to be like I am making food, getting them showered, putting them to bed. It could be a whole host of things. So I think that's really important to remember as we have this conversation. So you don't exclude yourself, right? Like,
Mhm.
so you don't go, oh, well, it's not that bad. I'm not really doing that much. So why I don't have to have these, I don't get to have these feelings, right?
And I just want to add really, really fast. So my grandparents, who have since passed away, lived in Maine. And I could watch somewhat from a distance as my stepmom, who lived in Maryland, you know, her caring for them, and then my aunt and uncles who lived in Maine caring for them. Each of them had very different struggles,
Yeah.
very different challenges. Um, and I'm sure each of them might argue that their own or that the other person's were harder. I don't know how they would argue it.
Yeah.
But they were all very valid and real. And very difficult to figure out how to navigate, even though they were very different.
Yeah.
So
And I
just,
think, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's an interesting experience a lot of us in our 40s probably have had of watching our parents parent up, right? Like,
mhm.
or watching our family members parent up. And what does that look like? And how did they go through it? And how did they feel? So you sort of have like, possibly secondary trauma, or you have, but you have the experience of witnessing the ins and outs of it and how did it play out with people. I know in my family I watched that happen, and got dragged into it happening with my grandparents, and it was really painful and hard and left lasting things in our family that we still have to work through. So I think, we have a lot of experience to pull from, but we also have a different environment at this point where we can, I think we can do better. I don't want to say do better like they did
Well,
poorly, but like be kinder to ourselves and others about how it's all playing out.
I think also for a lot of people, our parents' generation was one of the first that maybe wasn't in the same community as their
Yes.
parents.
Yes, I think that's accurate.
And so they didn't have that template to look at. And so theoretically, if you're not in the same community, or even if you are, or even if your parents were, but now you can look at friends who aren't, like you have some other people to kind of look at and say, okay, I have a way to navigate this in
Yeah.
a different way, or this was went well, this didn't go well, I'll try to do this differently. Whether it will work or not, who knows? It's all kind of a crapshoot. But like,
Yes. Yes, it is.
you look back and you're like, that seemed like a little decision at the time, and in hindsight it maybe was a big one. And I think, as with all of life, right, it's always the little decisions that you look back and you're like, oh, that I think that was a big one.
Yeah, that was like a pivotal point or
Yeah.
change in my life.
And you don't know what it is at the time, and you
Yeah,
just hope that with a little more awareness going forward that you'll be able to spot those little decisions.
right. Um, so sandwich parenting, I don't really, I hate saying that because it's weird. Um, it doesn't feel right. I can't really explain why. But the idea that, you're having your own children, and we have children later now, right? If we have children at all.
Mhm.
And so we're typically older parents, and I don't know. That I'm having flashbacks to when they
Geriatric
told me I was a
parents.
geriatric pregnancy. So I'm sorry. Um, but we're typically older parents, and I can't say it without that tone of voice either. Where where we have younger children, like my kids are 11 and almost 7, and I'm not, 30 anymore. So it's
Oh,
a, I know, sometimes I forget. It's a different experience raising kids when you're older. And then your parents are like my parents were younger parents. And so they're not particularly old, and they're perfectly capable of taking care of themselves and doing whatever they need to do. But I still have the feelings associated with sandwich parenting, right? Of like worry or feeling like I need to take care of something or doing something for them or making sure things are okay or, finding out about the doctor's appointments that they have or their retirement plans or, end of life planning, which is that could be a whole episode in and of itself because it's horrifying and really hurts my heart. Um, but just understanding that it can look different for everyone and our experiences, while unique, are connected. And so we can have this conversation around what does it do to your heart to be in a position where you're constantly on guard, like where you're constantly ready to take care of somebody and it's not you, right? Like that's the feeling that I get of like, it's not me I'm taking care of, it's like everything else. Which is also, the definition of being a woman. But I digress.
Well, and I think, I have lots of statistics and we don't really need to throw around too many of them, but it can be very expensive, whether it's flying back and forth or helping someone financially. But, it's over 40 million, and I don't know if that's in this country, but I think it is. Over 40 million people work as unpaid caregivers for someone age 65 or older. And caregivers, it could be, I don't know what the definition of caregiver is, but I think that the worrying starts before the care starts. And I think
it certainly does in my experience.
I think that's the problem. And,
right.
And, even just, the amount of energy and stress and exhaustion that can go into making sure, you are there for doctor's appointments. And let's be clear, these are not things that like everybody should have someone at your doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
Like
yes.
I have a lot of doctor's appointments and I think it's really helpful to have somebody either there or on the phone. So this is not because somebody is 80 years old that they should have somebody at the doctor's appointment. It's because it's helpful to have two sets of ears at a doctor's appointment. So, it just happens that unless you have cancer or you're 80 years old, you have a lot of doctor's appointments. Like you have more when you get older.
Right.
It's not, so this isn't something, I think that other than your like annual health checkup, when you're 40 years old, if you have a special doctor's appointment, you should probably have someone with you or someone on speaker. Like, and it just happens that as someone gets older, they have more of those. Right. And
right.
so, because I think that, someone could bristle at hearing like, well, I can take care of myself. And it's like, you know what? None of us can. So like, and maybe this is, maybe I'm expecting, our parents to be listening to this going, we can take care of ourselves.
Oh,
and
mine definitely will be.
Yeah. And mine will be too. And I think that's also, I don't know I think that is something that every generation, I'm thinking about like the greatest generation.
Sure.
And they were like, we fought Hitler. We can take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And now we have the boomers and it's like, we're fine. We're good. We're good.
Although we are fighting Hitler again, but again, I digress.
Again. Yeah. But I think that, one thing that would really help all of us, is if we remember that none of us can take care of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think
it helps this conversation a lot.
Yeah, it does. And changing it from taking care of yourself to being willing to let someone help you take care of yourself, right? Because it's not the case that you can't take care of yourself. It's the case that sometimes, as in all the time, it's great to have someone to lean on and to help you and to be there and to be a support, even if it's a silent support or if it's a more active support.
Sometimes, especially if it's a silent support.
Yeah, exactly. But if they're asking questions or like, you and I have been to multiple doctor's appointments and I just take notes on my phone. Like, and it's not because you can't take care of yourself. Of course you can. It's because having a second person or a third person or a whole family system around you supporting you feels better and it is better and it does help. And it doesn't have to be a moral declaration about your capacity for self-care, right? Like it doesn't have, I think that's where we get tied up sometimes is we take this on as like a moral failing if I can't do everything by myself. And I say that as a person who is wildly independent and always has been. In I learned over time that, wow, it's so much nicer to have somebody that I can talk to or that can even just be there while I'm getting some sort of news or be available to me. I think that, it's hard as an independent person and most people are fairly independent, but it's hard to recognize that that is not, your personal flaw or a shortcoming. And of course, part of that is cultural because we focus so much
Yeah.
on independence in this country and being, bootstrapping and all that nonsense. Again, I'm doing a lot of digressing today.
Listen, if
Sorry.
only we listen, I'm ready. If only we invested in trains and not highways. I truly think that that's where the country like zigged when we should have zagged, because it would have been like if we were all in it together on a train, we would have
Right?
been way less like we got to be independent.
Yep.
But also, I digress. No, but I do think that that streak of independence that has lasted, 2 centuries, 3 centuries, more than a streak, I suppose, has it does make it difficult, and it does add a stress. It does add an extra stress, and it is something that hopefully people learn. And it's I think it's really important that you do learn, because if you look at, and I look at my grandmother as an example, she never really learned how not to be really independent.
Yeah,
And it was very lonely for her. Like
exactly.
when she didn't have the relationships that she established as a young person, when those people passed away, because she lived to be 93, or 92, she was very lonely. Right. And so that's, the sooner that we, recognize that it is okay to not need other people, but want other people's help.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody at the used book sale, because I just am like, let's just have deep conversations at our children's used book sale.
No
The other
small
day,
talk.
I know, and and she was saying that how hard it is. She had struggled with post babies, what you have post babies.
Postpartum.
That's the word. And she was saying, how hard it was to ask for help. And I said, if it helps to ask for help, when you are not willing to ask for help, you as a helper are telling other people that it's not okay to ask for help.
Right.
And so as a parent, I'm looking at the top side of the sandwich, the bread on top of the sandwich. If you want your kids to be able to come to you, if you want the meat of the sandwich to be able to come to you and ask for help, you need to be willing to ask them for help.
Right.
It has to go both ways.
Yeah. That's how you breed trust and being, we've talked about this at length. If you are willing to be vulnerable, then you can create that vulnerability within the relationship, whether it's as a parent to parent or friend to friend, whatever the relationship
Yeah.
is, creating that trust loop, I guess, is how we build those relationships. And I think people, particularly of our parents' generation, because they were raised to be like, you don't need anyone, do it all yourself, or at least to think that's what they were doing.
Go burn a bra. Just, be on your own.
Right. Um, I think I think that they have a harder time with this. I also think, and I want to be cognizant of this and also empathetic towards the feeling that I assume as you age, you become more attached to your independence, right? You become more attached to the fact that you can do everything yourself. And because it's terrifying in some ways to age and to think about, this isn't going to last forever. And things are changing. My body's changing. My mind is changing. Everything's changing. And you can't stop that train to use the trains again. Once it's going, and you're going to age and things are going to change and you're going to need help eventually. And that can be frightening, I think, on a large scale for people. And so to acknowledge from that position the need for any kind of help is acknowledging the fact that you're changing and that life is going on and it won't go on forever. And that I imagine is fairly upsetting for most people. And there must be, and we'll get to
Well,
this, I think more, there must be a grieving process.
And I think it is really important to recognize that that is what some people in the sandwich are going through. And then the people in the middle of sandwich are going, what I wouldn't give someone to make me a cup of tea.
Right. Right.
What I wouldn't give to have someone bring me a sandwich.
Someone else decide on dinner.
Yeah. Like, and because I was listening to you and thinking, yes, that makes sense. That makes sense logically. I understand that makes sense. I can't imagine. No, I can imagine. And I can see how what you're saying makes sense. And yet, I would love someone to bring me a cup of tea and like someone to make some decisions.
Right. Or to
And
be in charge in general. Like
right.
anyone else could be in charge right now.
And so I think let's take a break. I don't know how much we're going to get to the co-parenting other
I
than saying
know.
it's hard. But I do want to keep the conversation about this going because I think this is important. And we can always talk about co-parenting next season if we have to. um, that can be part of that's an important life skill. So
Yes.
but I do want to take a quick break and then talk a little bit more about the grief that you were talking about. So we'll be right back.
In case you didn't already know, we love talking.
True story. More than simply talking, we love researching, prepping, and bringing this podcast to life.
We launched We Go Boldly with the goal of reaching people dealing with the kinds of questions and concerns that we also face.
Things like how to hear my inner voice, how to make sure my habits are worth it and stick, how do I feel my feelings and still manage to function.
After years of personal work and lots of trial and error, we realized we have a lot to share on these topics.
Now we've been broadcasting for over a year and we are proud of our podcast.
And to no one's surprise, we still have a lot to say and talk about.
We sure do. We need your help to keep going. Every episode takes time and money to create, and we would love your support.
So, if you like what we are doing, please support us by joining our Patreon community and becoming a monthly subscriber.
Join our Patreon community today at patreon.com/wegoboldly. We are so grateful to all of our supporters. Now, back to the show.
So I think so welcome back. You ended talking a little bit or mentioning the grief, right? That you can feel and how there's these different feelings because I think it's really important to come to all of this from a place of empathy and recognize that everyone in the sandwich is grieving, even the bottom layer. In my head, by the way, the bottom layer are the grandkids. They're
Right.
the kids, right? And they can be grieving because they may be losing their parents because their parents are going and helping their grandparents more, or they can be losing their grandparents because their grandparents don't remember them anymore. Or I mean, we're talking like obviously like at the old side of the older side of the grandparents,
Right.
but a variety of things can happen. Or maybe their grandparents lived with them and now their grandparents don't live with them anymore because they moved into a retirement home. Or maybe they lost their bedroom because now their grandparents do live with them and they have to share. Like grief comes in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times we dismiss grief and we say, oh, they're disappointed, or oh, they're just spoiled, or they're being a brat, or they're just not adjusting well. And that can be said about every single part of the sandwich, right? Like they need to adjust better. This is what happens in life, right? You get older, your parents get older, your grandparents get older. Like this just happens. It's not being spoiled. It's not being disappointed. It's grief.
Yeah.
And caregivers can experience grief. People as they age can experience grief. And a lot of it is mourning the relationships, especially for a caregiver that they expected to have with their parents. that they expected to have with their kids. When it's talking about that, the relationship that someone expected with their kids, it could be grieving not being able to have the home life they envisioned with their kids. I know for me, a lot of the grief relating to my divorce was not the sounds awful. There was a lot of grief relating to the end of the marriage, but a lot of the grief, a huge block that the grief that I continue to deal with, not as often, but if it pops up, the grief that I continue to deal with is our home the one I imagined it would be? But that is grief that every parent deals with. After you get angry at your kids and you get in a fight with your 6-year-old and you're like, did I just really fight with my 6-year-old? Right?
Daily.
Like, did that just happen?
All the time.
Right. And you feel grief about that. You're like, this is not what I thought it would be. I thought there was going to be, we were going to have dinner every night on the table and we were going to have these discussions like the Kennedys, which apparently I'm obsessed with right now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I want to note there's another version, I think, of grief that, excuse me, that I personally have experienced. And that is and I'm just putting it all out there today, I guess. My relationship with my parents now is like a bajillion times better than it was when I was a kid. And so sometimes I feel the grief of why didn't we have this when I was growing up, right? Like, so you grieve what might have been. And I think all of that comes into play when we're having these conversations around caregiving and parenting and which direction, whatever direction you're parenting, there's always some level of grief associated in the sense that things are constantly changing. I know I keep saying that, but like everything has changed.
Well, even having 3 kids, there's stuff with I do with my third one that I'm like, oh, I wish I would have started that with my first one.
Right. And in reverse, right? Like
Yeah.
I had my daughter for 4 years before I had my son. We had a lot of time together, just her and I. I mean, obviously well, not obviously, but my spouse was very involved as well, but it was a lot of time of just her and I. I've never had that with my son. And now that's like typical, what are you going to do? You have kids in an order and that's how it goes for them. But I do grieve that sometimes of like, why haven't I, well, not why, I know why, but like, missing out on that one-on-one time. So it can
Well,
be in all different places.
and grief doesn't have to be logical, right?
Yeah.
Because you can like read the studies of like you're like, I don't spend as much time with my second child. And then you can be like, but your first child gives more attention to your second child than you ever could give even your first child. Like, you can read all the nonsense studies that are fact-based, whatever, but like blah, blah, blah. But like
science,
grief doesn't have to be based in fact.
Right.
Grief doesn't have to be, well, if you wouldn't have been through that, you wouldn't get where you are and you wouldn't have the wonderful relationship you have with your parents now. It's like, well, phooey to that.
Right. Like, why couldn't I? I want it.
Yeah, I want it all.
No, it's not logical. I mean, that's the part of the point of it, right? Like it's logical in the sense that it makes sense to grieve these losses. Like that to me makes perfect sense. Of course you're going to grieve them. You didn't get them. You didn't get what you wanted. That's sad. And it's not being selfish or as I forget what word you used before, but like it's not just poor
Spoiled,
adjustment
disappointed,
or spoiled. It's a real loss in your life. And I think importantly, like as a person in the middle, there's all kinds of change happening. And I'm trying to use the word change more than loss because it's not necessarily a loss. It's just different. And so, watching my parents age, I'm grieving that. It's hard. It's really hard. I don't know how else to describe it. It just makes me sad sometimes. And other times it makes me happy because they're cool and hip and like still not, I don't know. They're still doing stuff and they're fun. But then I watch my kids grow and there's grief there and there's sadness there because you're like, oh my God, they're gonna leave me soon. And then there's of course joy because you're like, oh my God, they're gonna leave me soon. Just kidding, everyone. I love my children. But it is like it's a whole long process of change and how you adapt to change and what you do for yourself during change. And it's stressful. It's really stressful on the heart, spirit, soul, person, whatever you want to describe it as. all that change brings a lot of stress. And so you have to figure out how to cope with it and how to manage it and how to allow yourself to experience it such that it doesn't become overwhelm or destructive or you lose yourself in the process.
So I want to go, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about some different ways to cope with the stress. And we're going to set aside all the ways that we know: eating healthy, exercise, meditating. We know these ones. But I came across a bunch of lists, and I would like to highlight the list that the things that are actually either things that we don't talk enough about. They seem obvious, but we don't talk enough about them, or things that are just a little different that I thought were fun. One I tend to do, just as an aside, is I talk about how I want to be whelmed, not overwhelmed, just whelmed. And that generally makes me laugh. See,
That's
it
pretty
made you
good.
laugh.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So if I think about, like, my goal is just to be whelmed today, that is enough to sometimes help with my stress, because, by the way, laughter is one of the things that can help break up your stress cycle, like literally physically can help with your stress cycle. So, so here's a list. It's a long list, and that's okay because it's not all going to work for everyone. But it is a good list. And so one of the first things, is a good way to cope with stress. Speaking of lists, is making a list of what's most important and letting go of tasks that can wait. I think oftentimes we think everything on our list has to be done today. It feels like that. And I know some of you are listening and going, it feels like that because it's true, Tova. It actually isn't true. And I'm going to use an example real fast. So I have some deadlines. They're self-imposed deadlines, but they're just deadlines because I want things off my plate of some website designs that I'm doing and logos I'm working on. And I have recently, because I have a tendency, one of my old habits is, if I just don't sleep, right, I can get stuff done. And then I can check stuff off my list. And I am determined. I told our circle this week, I'm using them as accountability partners. I am not going to push through. I know if I stay up past 10:30 or 11, I can power through till 2 or 3 in the morning, and I will be a mess and awful, and it will be horrible, but I know I can do it. And that is an old Tova habit. And it is not one that I'm going to fall back on. I'm going to get good sleep, and things will get done when they get done. And they will actually probably get done sooner than if I did the bad sleep. But what I have done is I have reached out to someone whose logo I'm working on. And I said, I'm going to try to get through it this week, but the kids are off school and I'm not going back to old habits of staying up too late to work on things. I just said it. I just said it because it's a life or death thing. It's not a life or death thing. Like, she wants it by Thanksgiving. That's 2 weeks away. Like, she doesn't need it yesterday. Like, it's okay. And so write out the list. It's one of the reasons in my planner, I actually make a list at the beginning of the month. And then I only move things over week by week. And then I actually only move things over day by day. So then I only look at the things that have to be done each day. Like, that's a whole other podcast conversation to have. But so many things we think have to be done in a day that actually we want them to be done that day. They don't have to be done. And we need to let go of the things that don't have to be done that day. So that's the first one that I thought was a great tip.
Yeah. No, I think that is probably one of the most important ways in which we can manage our stress level and our, as we mentioned earlier, overwhelm, to just get to whelm. Another thing is enlisting the help of other family members. And I'm doing this right now as we speak. My daughter is in charge of my son right now, so that we can podcast because they're off school this week, etc. And sometimes I worry that I am putting too much on my kids or putting too much on other people or asking too much, right? Like, I think that's a common concern. But on the flip side of that, when people ask me for things, I usually do them, right? Like, I usually give people my time, my energy, my space, if I can. And so why is it okay for me to give, but it's not okay for me to ask? And that's the conversation I have to ask or go through with myself when I start to have those feelings. And I think it's important that you all start doing that as well if you're struggling with asking for help or putting a quote burden on other people. Do you do things for other people? Probably. Why is that okay? If it's okay for you, it's okay for others. So I think it's really, really important. It also, as I like think about it, it's good for my daughter to have that sense of responsibility for an hour, hour and a half. Like it's not gonna hurt her to have to think about somebody else, especially since she's 11 and you know, that's not the 11-year-old go-to.
Well, and I also think this can go hand in hand with the lists, right? Like, look at your list and be like, who else can do things on this list, right?
Yeah.
So if you're caring for a parent, I have a very good friend who is going, her father suddenly passed away in September, and it was very surprising, and her mother was not prepared for. But they're still navigating like running the household and figuring out just how to pay bills and things like that. And she's figuring out, how, her mom didn't know how to use a computer, right? And so her mom, the learning curve is just intense. And she's taken on a lot of the responsibility. And she's figuring out a way to also have her brother take on the responsibility. And she's trying to do it in a way that isn't just like, you have to do more, but also he has to do more. Like it's not, and so it's okay to look at your list and be like, I can't do this all, and other people have to do some. So I'm going to do what I can. And then I'm going to say, here's the rest of the list. Split it up amongst yourselves, like figure it out.
Right.
So this is one I just wanted to say, because I don't think we say it enough. Make time to socialize. Like I had a very strange 24 hours from Sunday to Monday night. And I texted a friend on Monday in the early evening and was like, early morning walk. And she said, yes, and we met at around 6:15 and like squeezed it in before we had I guess one of her kids was woken up, but before we had to wake our kids up for school. And, even if it's a squeeze in, and this goes to another one, I'm going to skip ahead really quickly, taking micro breaks. Because I think that when we think sometimes socialize, we're like, oh, a weekend, a girls' weekend or a spa day. No, it can be a 45-minute walk with a friend before the kids wake up.
Yeah.
It can be hey, after we volunteer for the used book sale, do you want to get a quick cup of coffee for 30 minutes? And micro breaks can be even smaller. And this is something that I utilized a ton during the stuck at home part of COVID, where I would just say, I need 5 minutes. And I would have my kids set in a timer, right? So that they would trust that it would only be 5 minutes, because it was the only way I would get them to leave me alone. Because otherwise they'd be like, she's going to leave forever in my bedroom. By the way, I was going to leave forever in my bedroom. But they're like, she's going to stay there forever, leave us forever. And so I would just like set a timer, but you cannot come in until the timer goes off. You have to give me this time. And a lot of times I would just read, or I would stare up at the wall in like a comatose state of just like overwhelm.
Of make it stop.
Yeah. But
yeah,
I mean, those kinds like micro breaks, sometimes I would do a quick meditation, but it could give me a chance to do like deep breathing, or just do a reset. And honestly, for the people around me, it would do a reset too. I think if you're caring for your parents, like if you're in the thick of helping, and if you're at a different stage where you're like more physically caring for your parents, being able to say, you know what, you're good for now. I'm going to step outside and walk around the block. I need to take some deep breaths.
Right.
I think it is so often that we don't realize how often we don't take deep breaths.
Yes. Or we just hold our breath and,
yes.
Grind our teeth. Yeah, absolutely. I think in addition to this concept of micro breaks, which I do think is, something we haven't really talked about as much, and I think it's important to highlight, it's great to put things on your calendar for the future too. So you have something to look forward to. So yeah, you can't always do a whole spa day or like a weekend away with your friends or by yourself if you're me. You can't always do those things, but you can plan for them, right? Usually, not always. Sometimes there's economic factors at play or time, or you just can't, like, you can't get away. But there's still things you can plan for in the future, and you can put them on your calendar, and it will help you recognize, like, in the midst of that stress, like, oh, okay, well, in a couple weeks, I'm going to go do this, and that's going to feel really good. So I'm going to just manage this for right now. And that can really, I think, help mitigate some of that stress. I think also identifying what stresses you out and recognizing how you're dealing with it are two really important factors, right? Like, not everybody gets stressed by the same things. It depends on who you are and how you function in the world. And so maybe there's some trigger for you with your parents or a parent that causes you a great deal of stress, and you shouldn't be the person to help with that thing, whatever it is. Now, if it's everything that triggers you and causes you a great deal of stress, then maybe therapy with you and your parent. But like, understanding that there are certain things that are going to make you more stressed than others, and allowing yourself to have someone else deal with that thing, have someone else take over.
Or have someone else know. Like
Yeah.
so I hosted Friendsgiving this weekend, and it was wonderful. And part of what made it wonderful was that my cousin was here, and she was a huge help. I mean, part of what made it wonderful is she like chopped vegetables, and she taught my son how to chop vegetables without cutting off his fingers.
Mm.
And I mean, now because he's watching YouTube shows, and he's like, no, I can cut it this way. And she's like, no, you really can't cut it that way. In fact, there was at one point where there was like multiple grandparents supervising, and I was just like, I'm taking a shower, like I'm out of this. But before the weekend, I told her some of my triggers, like, and I said, around 10 o'clock or 10:30, I'm going to get really stressed. And it's not because anything's burning in all likelihood, because I don't tend, knock on wood, although I tend to burn the kids like frozen food in like the air fryer. I don't actually burn like Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
I was like, it's probably, you're going to look around and be like, why is Tova acting like a wacky person? But it's going to happen. And then but this is why I'm stressed. And it has nothing to do with anything. You see, it's from like 30 years ago. This
Right.
is like triggering stuff. And frankly, because she knew, it didn't happen. Like, because she knew, I was able to be like, okay, I'm in the trenches with somebody, because I knew what my stressors were. I knew what was going to trigger me. And I wasn't by myself in those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And when I kind of felt them coming on, I was like, I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to go like to run to the grocery store. And like, she was kind of my partner. And so I think knowing your triggers and stresses so you can remove yourself from the situation, or you can navigate around them, can be helpful, but also knowing them so that you can share them with somebody.
Yeah.
And so that you're like, I can't avoid this, but I also don't have to do it by myself.
Right.
Can be huge.
Right.
Um,
So a couple other things. Stop saying should. We've talked about this at length.
Yes.
Being a perfectionist is a losing game. It is a constant battle against yourself, and you will not win. And that is just if you can let it go, let it go. If you can't, get some help from a professional. And I say this as a recovering perfectionist. It is a brutal way to live your life.
And we have so next week's conversation is with Bunmi, and she's spectacular and wonderful. And I'm so glad that she's joining us again. I feel like we're watching her. I think the term is a glow up. I mean,
Yeah.
she was already spectacular.
Yes.
But I feel like we get to be like along for her ride.
Right.
Just
For
like,
the evolution.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
But she talked about her evolution, like being a good daughter, sort of.
Yeah.
And how in the past she would never send I don't want to steal the thunder of her story, but it's a much longer story, so I think steal this little part. But like, how in the past she would never send an Uber for her mom at the airport.
Right.
And then she realized that like the point was not to like, if that was going to cause so much stress for her, the point was to get her mom from the airport to her home.
Right.
She did not need to rearrange her whole day, and at a crazy amount of stress, she could send an Uber like it worked. It did the job. And then she would be able to catch up with her mom that weekend in a much less stressful environment. And, I think that's what we need to remember, that sometimes, done is better than perfect. Like done is good enough.
Yeah.
Like,
well, in that example, I think it's also important to recognize that like the short-term discomfort that you experience in making that decision and seeing it through is outweighed by the long-term benefit of you're not stressed, you got your work done, and you have the time to then be fully attentive to the present moment. And that is a long-term gain that you may not like recognize right away, but it's important that we stop shying away from discomfort as if it is going to break us, because it's not.
there's also one more thing, and we have not talked about this. And so this is not a high note, but we're going to add it at the very end too.
I like it.
Why not? One thing that can really complicate being part of the sandwich generation, being part of any relationship with literally anyone, is resentment.
Oh, yeah.
And grief and shoulds and all of this complicated emotions, basically being a human, can build resentment.
Yeah.
And so taking care of your heart, though, and figuring out, how do I support the people that I care most about, the people who gave me life, right? Or who helped lead me down a path of life. Either way, are my parents, the people who have been a big part of my life at some, throughout my life.
Right.
How do I help them, support them, show them my love? And I guess we've made an assumption that there's like a fairly functional relationship happening here in this.
Well, yeah, we have, except I do want to say, like, there may not be, and you may
Right.
still feel responsible and like
Right.
you have to show up. And that is a whole complicated mess that,
Yep.
Again, therapy, please.
And
For all,
boundaries.
and
Big
boundaries. But
big
it's
boundaries.
still, you still might be the person who is doing the caregiving.
And that is where you figure out when you can send the now this is a more like the symbolic Uber.
Yeah.
Like this might be when you say, no, you cannot move in with me. Like
Right.
under no circumstances is that healthy for either of us.
Yes.
Like, and you have to do that because you have to protect your heart. You have to protect your children. You have to protect. And by the way, protecting yourself is enough. Like if you
Yes.
want to use the cover of protecting your children, go for it. But protecting yourself is enough. But I do think that one thing that we always have to be careful of, is resentment in a relationship. It is very hard to undo resentment. So this goes back to your temporary discomfort. If sending an Uber causes you some temporary discomfort, but can prevent you feeling resentful, because resentful is not an intentional feeling.
Right.
And resentful is very hard to undo once you feel it. And it's not something that you're like, it's a very hard feeling to navigate. And you don't mean to. And you're like, I don't want to feel resentful of you. And so you have to take precautions so that you don't. And so be aware of that when you're making decisions. If it's something that you're doing because you should do it, and not should because like you have a responsibility, but like you're like, I should to be the perfect daughter or son, like, think about that, because there can be no healthy relationship if resentment is underneath.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to recognize that resentment stems from a lack of boundaries.
Yes.
And you, as an individual, are responsible for setting your own boundaries. Other people are going to do what they do. It's your job to set the boundary and hold the line, whether it's with you setting a boundary with yourself or with your family members or other people. If you aren't willing to set the boundary, then yes, you will find yourself feeling resentful. In my personal opinion, that resentment is not the other person's fault. It's not the other person who has created the resentment. It's you, because you didn't set the boundary and you chose to do the thing you knew you didn't want to do, that would hurt you, that would cause you distress. And there you are. resentful.
I mean, have you ever like experienced it and somebody said, and where it's like, well, if you didn't want to pick me up at the airport, why did you pick me up at the airport?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
This is why
absolutely.
I love hanging out with people who have really strong boundaries, because I'm just like, I'll ask for whatever I want. If they don't want to do it, they'll just say no. It's great. It's fantastic.
It
I
is.
love
And
it.
you know what? It makes healthier relationships on so many levels, but that also, it creates trust. Like you can trust me that I'm going to tell you the truth and I'm going to be honest, right? And vice versa. And that is I mean that is fundamental to any relationship. The other thing I keep meaning to mention, and this comes up in my own life, is when you have siblings and you have to figure out like how to navigate helping either your kids and their kids or your parents, or your, the adults, the older adults in your lives. That adds a whole layer of complexity that we didn't really get too much into. But like for me and my brother, we live on opposite coasts, and it's me here with our parents. And yeah, that can breed resentment if I don't set boundaries, right? If I don't say, you need to get your butt on a plane and get here and do something. And I've done that. And he's been like, okay. I mean, there he is. Um, and so that took a lot of work to get to that point where he and I can have these kinds of conversations and we can be like, this is what's going on and I just can't do it. So you're going to need to do it. And fortunately for me, he's open to those conversations, and fortunately for him, I'm open to them as well. And it makes it a lot easier, but I don't think that that is necessarily the norm. And so if you are in a sibling relationship and like I can look at my family and see like the older adults in my family have siblings, and one person took on more than the other, and yeah, there's resentment right there, and that festers and creates ugly relationships, and it shouldn't, or I don't want to use the word shouldn't, but it doesn't have to. Like we don't have to get to that point. But it requires some intentionality on all of our parts in order to avoid it. So I know I'm a little out of order on that one, but I thought it bared mentioning.
No, I think it's important. So that being said, I think we can wrap up.
Yeah.
And let's look at some homework.
Yes.
So we let's think of what our homework is going to be this week.
Well, so my thought was, and we didn't get to talk about this as much as we meant to, but holding space for yourself is essential, as you said, Tova, in the very beginning. And it's not something that we are necessarily publicly encouraged to do because of all of these comments about life where you're being selfish or you're being difficult or you're just not adjusting or adapting or I don't know, whatever the words are. And so I think figuring out how you can hold space for yourself, be okay with holding space for yourself, and set some of those boundaries that we keep talking about. So I would suggest that everybody take the week to make a list of like, where in your life do you need to set some boundaries, and then pick one and do it and just see how it feels. And if it's uncomfortable, that's okay. It's not going to be easy right away, or maybe it is, but like for the most part, I don't think it's going to be easy the moment you do it. So that's my homework for the week. I don't know if you had another idea, but
I think that is great. And I think it is perfect because we are listening to this the week before Thanksgiving.
Yep.
There are going to be a lot of boundary pushers as we lead up into the holidays. And this is actually, I think, a great practice to do on a regular basis, but especially in the holiday season.
Yeah.
So definitely make a list where you need to set some boundaries, pick a boundary to set, and see how you feel. And this is great practice for holding space. So you may not have any children, you may not have any aging parents. You could be 25 years old and your parents are 45 and everything is delightful. You still need to practice setting boundaries and holding space for yourself. So with that in mind, pick one, write your list, pick your boundaries, and practice. It will not make perfect, but it will make better.
Yes. The other things we want you to do this week is to join our women's circle if you are interested. We think you should be. It's a lot of fun. It's also a great place to hold space for yourself. So if you want more information about that, you can find us on the internet. You can find us on social media. You can find us anywhere. We're all over the place. So reach out to us. Let us know if you're interested. We would love to have you. We meet weekly. We hold space for each other, for ourselves, and we grow together. And what's better than that? I don't know, not much. So that's it for this week. Until next week, like Tova said, we'll be back with an interview with one of our favorite people, and we're very excited about that. So everyone have a wonderful week. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy those boundary setting exercises, and let us know how it goes. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.